and welcome to the show. Thomson Reuters and CNBC TV18 present the New Age CFO Transforming Basics. Now, we've conducted an extensive survey across many CFOs in the leading global companies in India, and they have all shared the usage of technology in the core functions of the finance roles, and all this so that the CFOs get the agility to take up larger roles and more strategic decisions in their organizations. Joining me are some special CFOs, the leading CFOs of the country, to discuss the technological advancement in their core operations. Let me introduce the panelists. Somin Ray joins us from Bajaj Auto, Anurag Mantri from Jindal Stainless, Vishal Parekh is part of Thomson Reuters, which conducted the survey with CNBC TV18, and Amitabh Mukhopadhyay joins us from our Pune studio and is the CFO of Thermax. Gentlemen, so good to have you on CNBC TV18. Now, my first question to Somin, of course, the topic itself says that a lot more is expected from a CFO rather than just bookkeeping, which a CFO used to do earlier.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, because the job of a CFO is now metamorphosizing into multiple things which are more aligned to business partnering, and hence the transactional bookkeeping or compliance jobs are getting less and less share of both the mind space as well as the attention of a CFO.
Right. So, since the stage is set now to discuss what the CFO is expected to do, now Vishal, of course, a lot of that really comes from the leeway that the normal finance functions or the core role really gives the CFO to have the agility to move on to greater roles. How have you seen this transformation in terms of the core finance operations of a CFO being automated with the use of technology? And you have spoken to various CFOs in Asia as well as in India. How is that front developing?
So I think, in terms of the automation, there's a fair bit of automation which we saw in the India survey as well as in the Asia survey, which Thomson Reuters did. There's a fair bit of automation, but there are areas where there's a significant gap in terms of automation. So one of them, which is possibly one of the most high-risk areas, is around compliance and regulation. So even our survey, where most of the CFOs are spending less and less time on transactional stuff, but lots more on compliance. And that's becoming a big area where CFOs are now looking at automating and using technology to solve for their needs.
Right. So coming to you, Amitabh, in Pune, now as Vishal said, compliance is one of the biggest aspects that the CFOs are really focusing on. And CFOs are also considered the custodians of compliance. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, surely. I think Vishal pointed it out very correctly that as CFOs, today, most of our core functions have got automated, but compliance is an area. First, the complexity is also increasing, and this is not an area which can be automated that fast. Secondly, what is happening with the geographical spread increasing, the compliance dimension of compliance, the complexity around compliance is also quite different from what it was a few years back. Like today, in our context, I can say that we are present in 20 countries, and in these 20 countries we have to meet and comply with all the local regulations. Another point which is happening is across the board the international laws are coming up. Today you see it is an era of base erosion and profit shifting regulations, new norm for transfer pricing. Every form of international conventions are getting modified, and this is definitely putting a different kind of a challenge for the CFOs. And as custodians, yes, a significant time of ours are going. While the Indian compliance is getting fairly automated, we are now looking at how to improve and get a higher degree of assurance for compliance in the other countries as well.
So as Amitabh was pointing out, and Anurag, come in on this, do you think that the CFOs today are really playing the catch-up game as the complexity in compliance is really ever increasing? And how much of focus do you give to this particular aspect, and how much of automation is being done in terms of compliance at your end?
Yeah, I think just to add further to a new dimension of the CFO role, now on the compliance side, the data integrity and the in terms of the protection of the data, because we are all global across, data is now free flow across the globe in all the servers,
Right.
and it's with the cloud coming, I think that's as a CFO role is as a gatekeeper to the data, so that at least the data is protected from the competition and from the outside. So I think this is another dimension to the compliance which is being added into the CFO's role. In terms of now what we see is the GST is the best example. Now all our servers are linked with and all data is uploaded on the government server on a regular basis, and I think we will see this transition happening across all the data. In my opinion, I think we will move to almost a daily P&L sort of, which is open to the entire public.
Right.
Gradually. So I think the compliance automation is happening by default in terms of because the government is asking certain data always on a real time basis. So I
Right.
think this is one has to keep the speed with the new regulations in terms of that.
Yeah, that's a very important point. So, Somin, government is also, and across the world this is happening now, governments are getting more and more digital, and therefore the companies have no choice but to also comply. They have also to go ahead and advance themselves when it comes to technology.
Absolutely right. Whether you take GST as he mentioned, which is a completely digital process, and even other things like, for example, companies who are into exports.
Right.
We have a lot of bills, shipping bills and stuff like that, which has to be moved. Now banks are coming up with EDPMS, IDPMS for imports and exports, where we can utilize. Yes, it has not become very large scale, but the movement is certainly there. What is more encouraging is some of the shipping lines are looking at using blockchain
Right.
to use to move the bill of lading.
Right.
Now, if these things were to happen, I think global trade would become much faster, especially outbound trade from India. And some of the countries, some of the companies who send to Latin America or to Africa, this will significantly cut down the lead time in supply chain.
Right, so that's a very important point, and in fact most of the companies here are more focused on manufacturing and are capital intensive in nature, so there again technology plays a huge role. But Amitabh, coming to you on the compliance aspect, you did talk about the complexities around it. What do you have to say from the tax point of view? We had a GST as a big reform, a lot of other countries have really taken up GST, and you also have an interface with other countries being a global company. What has been your experience in terms of technological advancement when it comes to tax compliance?
I think GST is really a path-breaking reform from the government's perspective. It is extremely bold reform, and what has happened because of this reform, there is a lot of focus on the technology. We have never come across before that such an integrated approach, that a tax reform and a technology-based advancement are going hand in hand. As a result, all the actors in the business processes, like us as suppliers, as customers, as providers of service, all of us had to gear up. And as it was mentioned some time back, that all our transactions we are uploading to the government portal. So there is a linking that is taking place for all these transactions. So this is one dimension. Second dimension is within the government system, the data is moving from one system to another seamlessly. What data we are putting in to the GST system, that is moving into the custom system. What data is uploaded into the custom systems by the shipping lines, that is getting matched with our data. So it is a complete technological transformation that has taken place. Initial days, I must say, it was a very, very difficult catch-up game for us. We have seen our business partners also were not ready. But over a period of time, if I look back today, 18 months down the road, things have really progressed. I think we actually are standing in a completely different maturity profile, and GST has uplifted the Indian business significantly, and that is the triumph of technology, and this is a great example.
Right.
I am not saying that all problems are over.
Right.
Still there are certain issues, there are teething problems getting sorted out,
Right.
but it's a big progress, big leap forward.
So Vishal, you have an interface with so many companies across sectors and across market caps as well. Here we are dealing with companies which are much bigger. So as Amitabh was pointing out, that maybe the ecosystem is sometimes not ready in terms of technology. What do you have to say about the overall infrastructure of technology so that the companies marry their systems with each other and with the government?
Yeah, I'll just get into that. But what's interesting, which as I'm hearing all the panelists, right, is that what's coming out very clearly is that as we've been talking to CFOs for the last few months now on the survey, the whole move to transaction automation was company-led. Was individual company-led, and it was an inbound program. What I'm hearing more and more of, which kind of keeps coming across multiple times, is that the entire compliance and regulation is actually government-led, where the government is digitizing a lot faster than companies are, which is kind of leading the companies to step up to technology. And on that point, I think to your question, which you just asked right now, in the past, where the entire ERP or your core system of records was everything where you want to solve everything in, right? However, with improved technology and better connectors, better kind of app-based technologies, cloud technology coming in, you now have specialized systems which kind of offer you very distinct advantages because that's all they cater to, be it a tax system or a legal system, risk trade, and they all connect with your core system of records.
Right.
That actually really helps the companies and the CFOs on this panel kind of enhance their productivity because now they don't have to have everything into one heavily customized ERP. Right. So it's starting to kind of the data's fluidity is starting to become very important, and security to that matter kind of is important, and then certified connectors are playing a big role in that.
All right, and to the same point, Anurag.
Vishal has made, we were moving at a certain pace.
Yes.
But in terms of the GST is the great example where suddenly overnight we had to put everything in a different pace. I think in terms of the compliance regulation, because led by the government.
Yes.
Otherwise, we were still doing the reforms in terms of our compliances, earlier excise and custom systems. But I don't think the GST has really pushed us into the different pace.
Oh yes, so catching up with the government's pace, that's clearly coming out loud and clear. But also, Anurag, in terms of regulations, tax aside, regulations are also changing. They are ever changing. How agile are the companies as well as the technological systems to really change with the changing regulations? Do you find that difficult as a CFO?
I must say, I think yes, we find it difficult in terms of keeping the pace with because regulatory changes across, and we being present in across the multiple countries,
Yes.
Across the globe. So it becomes more and more challenging to keep pace with every country's regulation. And whatever speed we put it up, but I think every government is changing regulation at much faster paces. So I think though we are doing now all these at a back end in terms of the compliance tool and in terms of which is the flagging and how we are doing the monthly basis, whether all the compliances are met across the globe and all the entities or not. But I think it's still every time we have to catch it up with that.
Hold your thought there, Anurag. So on that point, we will take a short breather on this special show and come back with more on what CFOs have to say about the automation of their core functions and the usage of technology in their areas of work. Welcome back. You're watching Thomson Reuters and CNBC TV18 present the New Age CFO Transforming Basics, and I have with me some of the leading CFOs of the country to talk about it. So first, Vishal, we have been talking about compliance, tax, regulations, but also this particular panel is more manufacturing in nature. What do you have to say about the trade automation bit? Where have we reached in that?
I think all the panelists touched on a little bit on the trade subject, but I think where we are seeing globally, and trade is as global as it gets, right? So what we're seeing globally is that end-to-end supply chain automation, more on the government and the compliance regulatory side. I think supply chain per se is automated, but I think on the documentation bit, because it's so many interfaces, so many governments, that's becoming one challenge,
Right.
which CFOs are looking to solve globally.
All right.
Another aspect which I think is the most unique one is free trade agreements.
Right.
As you know, as we've seen a lot of trade wars and all the buzzwords being used around that,
Right.
free trade agreements are becoming increasingly increasingly in demand,
Right.
primarily because there's just so much money left on the table, because the fear of availing a free trade agreement without actually having the right documentation leads to huge penalties, and
right.
that's why a lot of money is left on the table. With technology, there's more and more customers which we serve as well, who are seeing some phenomenal results to the point of millions of dollars in every quarter in just savings on through leveraging free trade agreements. And the last one, which is I think more a board topic more than anything else, is around knowing your customer.
Right.
It's about restricted party screening. Who are you doing business with? Make sure that one wrong move with one wrong vendor could really cost the company's kind of reputation. So just identifying that and putting in risks and risk kind of warning metrics to play with that.
In this digital world, Somen, you think that know your vendor, know your customer is a big issue that the companies deal with?
Absolutely. And when you are importing,
Yeah.
it's a different game, because there's somebody who's making it, so you're reaching out and buying. When you are exporting, it's a different thing, because you have to depend on that person for the distribution, management of the brand, doing the right pricing, ensuring regulatory compliances. So it is extremely important to know both your vendor as well as your customer.
Right.
Taking a bit from the regulatory point, which was mentioned by both of my panelists, I think regulatory gives you two options. One is the compliance, which we must do, and that is a table stake. But I think companies who will make a difference are people who take regulatory as a business opportunity.
Right.
Because every regulatory change creates a certain window of opportunity which you can exploit. Now the question is for companies to know, like for example, we operate in 70 countries.
Right.
To know what regulation is changing where and what opportunity does it present to me readily on a dashboard is very critical.
Right. And same goes for you as well, Anurag. I mean, steel is a global commodity. You have to deal with many companies overseas, even for your raw materials and for global trade. How technologically advanced are these trade talks? And the second aspect being, in India, steel is not as well organized. So how is your entire supply chain when it comes to the usage of technology?
See, in our case, the supply chain becomes most critical, because for a company like us, the working capital cycle becomes the most critical.
Yes.
Both in terms of our cost of capital as well as our exposure to the underlying commodities, because if we have a higher, longer working capital, then we are more exposed to the global commodity volatility.
Right.
So here the technology plays the key role. So like for example, in our case, the nickel is one underlying raw material. So we do what we do, we'll have to on a day-to-day basis, every day we'll have to monitor what is my nickel in and what is my nickel out. So right from my ship start from my vendor's place, and most of the things, our raw material comes from import side, and our the sales side we have both in the combination of domestic and export. But we'll have to track right from the scrap yard, because we make it from the scrap. Right from the scrap yard, when the ship leaves, what is my nickel exposure starting, and while my product getting sold even at my remote yard and say down below in the C grade city, we'll have to have a matching of that, whether I am managing my overall exposure within that range or not. So this we cannot really play if my ship is starting from Canada while the product is being sold at down below in Haryana. And how we manage down a day-to-day basis that what is my overall underlying exposure, this is only possible because of the technology and the system we have deployed.
So how evolved are we, and how much more improvement is required?
See, it's a continuous process, I must say. I think we in last 6 months we have put a lot of effort, and that has really reduced in terms of our volatility. but I think we still have further to go. So we are further evolving. It's only for done for one raw material. I think we are trying to do it for even each and every raw material component of ours.
What lies ahead, Vishal? I mean, we have automated to a large extent, but also upgrading it is a constant process.
It's becoming a very, you look at our smartphones, with the example you gave, right? It's not about Apple having all those apps on them. It's about different parties having them, right? The problem is around security. The problem is around making sure that you not going so thin and so low that the apps you're getting into are not providing enough kind of in terms of security. So, for example, Thomson Reuters spends like hundreds of millions of dollars every year on cyber security and just making sure that the data is safe, right? Our servers are safe. And you just want to make sure that you do that due diligence as you kind of look at technologies. In terms of the future, I think it's just about that. It's about kind of having specialized technologies.
Right.
You don't go to a generalist every time now, right? You always go to a specialist because now you know that there's one and you now can connect into your core systems. When it comes to upgrading your core, your different systems as well, it gives you the flexibility and agility to upgrade your ERP if you just want to upgrade your ERP, but then you have all these connectors safe, so you don't have to upgrade everything at one go, or you upgrade or change your vendor from one kind of app provider to another.
Right.
So I think the flexibility which you get is just immense, and that's kind of the way of the future in my opinion.
Right. So a note for our viewers, in case you didn't realize, we were just talking to the CFOs and not the chief technology officers, and the kind of study and the education that these CFOs have got in terms of the technology that can really help them in the usage of their core functions is just amazing, and also is very robust and is also changing very fast and is also evolving. So that's the biggest takeaway coming in, to be in the ecosystem. And with most of the government agencies now getting more digital, also because with technology comes transparency, most of the CFOs are also adopting the technological aspects, and this is an ongoing journey. With that, it's a wrap on this show, and Thomson Reuters and CNBC TV18 present the New Age CFO Transforming Basics. I thank all the panelists for joining us with their insights on the subject. Thanks so much to our viewers, and stay tuned to CNBC TV18.